You just explained how to fix Team USA. People are a little bit worried, a little bit shaky against South Sudan, a little bit shaky against Germany. What is going on? Are they doing the standard thing that they do where they look a little bit shaky and then round into form when the games truly do matter? Or does Team USA need Coach Jason Timpf to fix them in a matter of minutes? What say you?
I think, first of all, I think people need to acknowledge there is a difference in FIBA competition now compared to what it was 30 years ago. That goes without saying. I saw a stat actually this morning on Instagram. It was during the era of the 1992 Dream Team, there were single-digit NBA players that were playing for other FIBA teams. And in this tournament, there's over 60. So like that's a very basic description of that. And so expecting Team USA to like just run roughshod over everybody is silly. That's just not really possible. There's something to be said about diminishing returns too, and you have stars playing roles. That goes without saying. Yeah. Like it's not just the simple math equation of adding up talent. That said, I think we can all agree they shouldn't be in these knockdown, drag-out fistfights with teams like South Sudan and Germany. So they're obviously leaving some meat on the bone. And I'm not sure if you've heard anything behind the scenes, but I'm convinced that there's some sort of directive to keep Joel Embiid with the starters. Because a simple swap of just one simple swap of AD for Embiid rectifies a lot of issues in both units. So, for instance, Embiid can't guard on the perimeter. So he has to defend in a drop coverage, meaning he's going to hang out closer to the basket, and you're asking your guards to chase over the top. Well, who's in that starting lineup? Steph Curry, a guy who's going to turn 37 next year, a guy who became a functional defender, but was never a dominant over the top of the screen kind of fighting competitive defender. Devin Booker, not known for that sort of thing. Drew Holiday is, but he's the one guy in that unit next to the 40-year-old LeBron that can chase over the top of screens. So it's like a fundamental misallocation of resources to put your worst like screen navigators with the drop coverage big. And then you've got on the bench unit, you've got all of these athletes, guys like Jason Tatum and Anthony Edwards and Bam Adebayo. And like they actually could function better next to Embiid if you asked them to fight harder on the perimeter. And so by putting AD with the starters, you can switch more, which is what that unit should be doing. They're also like Embiid's just a little bit of a ball stopper. AD's more of a kind of ball reverser, continues to set screens, rolls into space. He's easier to play with as a star. Whereas the bench unit is a little funky on offense in the half court and probably could use a hub like Joel Embiid to run through more frequently. So I don't heard anything if there's some sort of intel going around in terms of a directive from Team USA. But to me, the clunkiness of Embiid with the starters versus AD and what the bench could use from Embiid offensively, I think is the main issue they're dealing with right now.
I mean, it's just got to be tricky to manage those egos. These are guys who typically have as many minutes as you can give them when they play in the NBA. And just knowing Steve Kerr a little bit, I'm sure those considerations behind the scenes have to factor in. The considerations they never admit to. I once had a friend who was allowed to sit in on coaches' meetings, and he was a journalist, but he was a little bit more in the NBA world. He was trusted, and he was just allowed to sit in on these meetings, don't write about them, observe. And what he told me is, you would not believe how much time and energy these guys spend on just communicating to some guy a role reduction that doesn't make him go off the deep end and completely stop participating. That is so much of coaching behind the scenes, is to somehow either communicate to a guy who's underperforming that he needs to perform better without crushing his ego. And a lot of it is also getting a guy to be demoted and not become a problem. And we don't look at having the most talent as a particularly difficult coaching job, but I think this is one of the aspects where it could be. Team USA, this assemblage of stars, and I would think that that's part of it. I know that Steve Kerr loves all those little tricks. He loves to manipulate these guys in a way where they even know that he's manipulating them, but somehow it all works. And one thing that Kerr once said to me that Bill Parcells said to him, because he did this whole tour with these different NFL coaches before he took over the Warriors. Parcells would communicate to a player who is underperforming. I guess I believe in you more than you do. It's too bad. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that that's the case. And that's just one of many tricks that you're able to communicate some bad news and say that you're not living up to standards without crushing the ego. So I'm getting digressive. The main central point that I'm making is just that I'm sure it's difficult to handle these guys and allocate those minutes, and nobody's going to break out the violin for Team USA, but I'm sure that's a bigger challenge than we know about watching at home.
I remember when I was working at Verizon Wireless, that was my job that I first got coming out of college. And they had done a massive reorganization of their infrastructure. And originally they had 8 partitions nationally. And each one of those partitions had their own kind of like VP or whatever you want to call the guy that was on top of that specific, division of the company. Well, they downsized it from 8 to 5. And I remember I was talking with my general manager at that time, and we were just kind of getting into the weeds about it. And he was like, "Yeah, he's like all the 3 market leads that they ended up, no longer needing. They just got rid of them and gave them severance packages and sent them away. Every single position, instead of it being reorganized and dropped below, they were just simply sent away with the severance. And the general idea was, it is impossible to like get the most out of that talent when they feel like they've been demoted. Like as soon as they feel like they've lost whatever power or authority they had, they suddenly become a less optimized version of themselves. So it's in the best interest of both parties to just let them go do their own thing, and for us to just kind of operate with what we have. Whereas conventional wisdom would lead you to believe, oh, that's a talented employee, you want to use them somewhere. And I think that kind of similarly is what you're navigating with basketball. And this goes to the diminishing returns piece. I was talking about this within the context of the Phoenix Suns. So, like, who's a better basketball player in a vacuum? Kentavious Caldwell-Pope or Bradley Beal? You're going to say Bradley Beal, right? And there's no doubt if you need Bradley Beal to lead your team, he's a better option there. But you could argue within the Phoenix Suns, a guy like KCP might actually be a better fit because he is particularly elite as a point of attack defender and attacking closeouts and running his lane in transition. He's one of the best transition scoring guards in the league, right? And so like there's this idea that like having a person that identifies that the team needs these 3 small things done really well, and I'm okay with devoting all my resources in that direction, will actually get more out of a basketball player than, say, Devin Booker, for instance. Like, you're asking him to do a pretty minuscule job on this team. You're asking him to defend and attack closeouts. And Devin Booker's just capable of so much more than that. And so I do think that navigating those personalities, finding guys who are willing to play roles. And so, for instance, like, would Embiid have some sort of backlash in terms of the way he behaved if he got benched? But like, there's got to be a delicate way to pitch that. Like, if I'm Steve Kerr, I'm going to Embiid and I'm going like, hey man, like, you've been out there with the starters for 4 games now. Like, LeBron's running the show. Steph's running off all these off-ball screens. Those guys are kind of controlling things. Like, you're not getting the kinds of opportunities to cook out of your triple threat in the pinch post area as you typically do. So how about we put you in there 5 minutes into the first quarter, and I want you to shoot the damn ball every time you get it. Like, that to me is a way to kind of like navigate that. And again, like, maybe he's just unwilling to kind of see the forest for the trees there in terms of Embiid, and maybe that's why he insists on starting. But like, I do think that that's a big part of it, is like getting people to focus those abilities. LeBron, for instance, he's barely shooting. He's taking like 10 shots a game, but he's slotting into this like Draymond Green role with this team where he's kind of operating out of the top of the key and functioning mostly as a passer. And it's like him slotting into that role kind of helps make everything work. And so again, I do think it's about getting guys to buy into specific roles. And I would imagine it's a lot harder in this context than it is elsewhere.
Yeah, I think the selection of Derek White really opened up that conversation. And I wonder if the conversation is changing. We've always had that idea of glue guys and sacrificing your shots for the greater good. But there's something about the modern NBA and how much versatility is part of it. And there's just a greater awareness of what wins. It seems like there might be less mythology now than there was in the past, that you don't look at Derek White necessarily as a role player. You might go, well, he is legitimately just better than a Bradley Beal. Certainly Bradley Beal right now, but he is better at this thing that we are calling basketball. Do you think there's a shift where there's that sensibility emerging where the superstar in his role, as Doc Rivers would put it, actually gets the respect that he wouldn't have been afforded 10 years ago?
So I think Derek White is the perfect example of this. Did you watch the South Sudan game by any chance?
I did not. I just saw people freaking out.
Okay.
I'll be honest about that.
So LeBron gets the game-winning layup with, I want to say there was 8 seconds left or something like that. And Carlik Jones, who absolutely cooked him all night long, had a triple-double for South Sudan. He hits Drew Holiday with this pretty nasty, like right-to-left move in the lane and gets a clean look. And so AD has to leave his man, I think it was Wenyen Gabriel, has to leave his man to come over to try to block the shot. And he forces Carlik to shoot this super high floater, which ends up going way over the backside of the rim. But Anthony Edwards fails to do his job when AD steps over. He's supposed to step over to AD's man and to box him out of the lane. Doesn't do it. And so that guy comes up to get a tip dunk, and he's got the ball in his hands, and he's right there ready to dunk it. And Derek White comes flying in from a different part of the floor, not even involved in the play, and just barely gets a piece of the ball, which forces him to kind of lose control, and he ends up throwing the ball into the front of the rim, and it's a miss, and the game is over. It kind of reminds me of his offensive rebound putback in Game 6 last year against Miami, if you remember.
Oh, yeah.
It's an effort play that comes from the motor you almost exclusively see in a role player. Those kinds of plays, crashing the offensive glass every single time, making an absurd extra effort defensively when it's not even in your area, those sorts of things are programmed into role players because they're constantly focusing their resources into these little things. Whereas for stars, those are commonly seen as areas to conserve energy so that your teammates can handle those issues, so that you can direct your responsibilities, your resources towards creating shots and doing the superhero stuff that you need to do. And that's the thing, like Derek White's motor never stops. He plays the same way all the time. He goes for every rebound. He competes on every defensive possession. You could argue, even though Jaylen Brown's a substantially better basketball player, that brings more value within the context of Team USA than Jaylen Brown does, which makes perfect sense. And so above any sort of politics that might have been going on with Nike, like Derek White was just a really good fit to help this team along. And like notice he's getting minutes over Tyrese Halliburton, who is another guy we would argue is a better player for the same reasons.